afternoon, again from Pipers'Persuasion. Again, it's Thursday the 25th of November 2010, got that one. And we're doing a double header today. We've managed to lasso Tom Spears this morning, and this afternoon very famous piper Colin Maclellan, who interestingly had an extremely famous father, Captain John Maclellan, British Army. We'll hear much more about that. And we're sitting in his den. I'm calling it his den. Colin will keep me right in a wee minute. At the top of a very fine stone establishment in the middle of Edinburgh called the 14 Dean Park Crescent. We've given you an unusual intro this afternoon, where we're showing you around the den just for about 30 seconds by way of intro. And there's famous photographs, medals, what have you. And just to give you a flavour of where we're having this interview, I could say much more, but I think I'll just cut it short there, and we'll take it right into the interview where we can discuss all these matters more fully. Okay, sit back and enjoy. Right, Colin, we're going to expose your piping life this afternoon.
Yes.
And the very interesting origins. And I'm just going to get right back to the beginning. Your father, Captain John Maclellan. Tell me about him, where he came from originally, what were his first piping influences as he learned from others, and take me through that part of right in up to the castle. Give me a big long story about Captain John.
Well, of course, he was actually born in Dunfermline in Fife in 1921, and the family moved about a fair bit. My grandfather, who was a piper, who taught my father initially, was working in the railway in Dunfermline at the time, but they based themselves mostly up in the Fort Augustus area, and my father grew up there in Fort Augustus and went to the Abbey School and learned his piping there from my grandfather.
Right.
And
your grandfather have any army background at all?
My grandfather was in the HLI,
okay,
and served in the First World War and fought in the Battle of the Somme. So he was a rare old gentleman, a very, very handy man, as we might talk about later on. So school days for my father was in Fort Augustus with his two brothers, William and Roddy. And my father, of course, went to school there and joined the army as a boy piper at age 15.
Right.
The Cameron Highlanders.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did they do piping before the army?
Well, yes, he did. He didn't. He played locally. He played in boys' competitions. Not a great deal, though. I mean, the stage of it going to the army was the start of where he came under formal tuition.
The real piping.
Yes, with Pipe Major Willie McLeod, who he always quoted as a big influence on his piping. They also, when they joined as boy pipers, were schooled in the army.
Okay.
And so they got schooling, and it's quite interesting. Some of his books are here, the school books from the army.
Yeah. And
then, of course, he became Pipe Major of the Seaforth Highlanders at a very early age, at the age of 19.
Right,
and started,
very early.
yes, it was exceptionally early at the time, and I think to date he's the youngest pipe major ever appointed in the British Army. And then the competing career started after that, not until quite late actually, until he was about the age of 25. He started competing, and he had a great deal of success straight away. I think his first competition in actual fact was at Oban, and he I think he won the marches, and he was second in the spade meal and a prize in the gold medal, and So he came in from virtually nowhere to do very, very well in the very first big event that he
So
played.
that was age 25.
About age 25.
So
yes.
doing my arithmetic, that's just late 40s, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Just right after the Second World War.
Yeah, yeah. And it'd be difficult at that particular time to get a decent amount of pipers together just because of the residue of the war.
Well, I
etc.
think so. I mean, things were in a state of flux at that time.
Yeah.
Several of the really big names who were competing before the war had taken the opportunity to retire because, of course, there was no competition during the war.
Yes.
Some of them were still around, but there was a sort of scad of new ones that came into it that had, I suppose, depending on what the situation was when the war was on, they were ready to compete by the time the competition started again, and my father was one of those.
Who taught your father gave him the tunes, etc., in his teens and early 20s?
Well, it would have been Pipe Major Willie McLeod at that time, and later on, of course, he came under the influence of Willie Ross,
Right.
which he always quoted as his main mentor in terms of light music and Piruch.
So what age would he come under Willie
Well,
Ross?
when he came under Willie Ross, he'd have been sent to the castle here in Edinburgh a little bit later on, probably just after the time he started competing.
Right.
And he was in there amongst, I think the young John Burgess was going to Ross at the time.
Right.
To this day, my mother, who's still alive, refers to Willie Ross quite reverently as Pipe Major Ross. She never says Willie Ross. It's quite interesting.
A strict hierarchy.
Very definitely.
Aye. And okay, is Pipe Major of the Cameron Highlanders, did you say?
He was Pipe Major of the Seaforth Highlanders.
Seaforth, sorry.
Yes.
Seaforth Highlanders. And where was he based at that point?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Right off the top of my head at that time, I don't really know.
So when did they arrive at the castle then?
Well, he didn't arrive at the castle on a formal basis until 1959.
Okay,
To
so
actually take
we've got a lot of
charge the
ground to
school.
cover between 25 and... So what did he do? He competed obviously. Late 40s, he's competing, he's getting prizes. So develop that wee bit.
Between the periods of about 1951, 1952 to 1958, which was the year I was born, he was posted abroad. And he was the Regimental Sergeant Major, RSM John Maclellan, Queens on Islanders, and he was posted to places like Malaya, Egypt, Germany, Gibraltar, where my sister was born in 1957. Now, he didn't compete for that long period of time. In actual fact, in his Piruch books, he kept a very diligent record of his appearances at Oban and Inverness. And I think he only played about 12 or 13 times at Oban and Inverness. So the record of prizes, etc., was quite phenomenal in a fairly...
Having regard to the fact he spent a lot of time abroad.
Yes, exactly, and he didn't play at all when he was abroad for that. A lot of times he didn't play at all. I remember him telling me that when he came back in 57, 58, I think he won the gold medal at Oban, I think was the first one in 57. He almost didn't come back at all because he said he was working away at it for a couple of years, and he just found it very, very hard to get back to the kind of level he was used to.
Yes,
and he did say that he just at one point didn't think that it was going to happen, but it did, fortunately. And
obviously, it must have been mounds and mounds of practice.
Well, yes, he often used to say to me, and he said to a lot of other people, that when he was practicing the march, the suspension reels, he would play them 3 times over, 3 times over the march, 3 times over the suspension reel, in preparation for the formal winners competition, where of course it was twice over.
Yes.
And he was the kind of piper, I think, that did an enormous amount of practice. So between the years of 57 and 63 or 64, when he retired, he really did very well indeed in that 5 or 6 year.
So Willie Ross keeping him right as well.
Yes, he did.
Along that period of time.
Yes, he did.
What instrument was he playing at that time?
My father's instrument was a Gavin McDougall of Aberfeldy set, and he acquired that set because when he was made the pipe major of the Seaforth Highlanders, it was the custom in the regiment for the pipe major to play on silver-mounted pipes. And my father's family wasn't a wealthy family or anything like that, and he was given the instrument on a loan basis from the regiment, and on the condition that he give it back when he was finished with it. And
yes.
And he took the pipes, and he played the pipes in the band, and they were very old pipes, and they weren't in terrific shape. And he did take them down to J&R Glen up in the Lawn Market, and the pipes were rebored in actual fact. And it was only when they were rebored and he got them back that he realised just what an absolutely amazing instrument that it was. So that was the instrument he'd used.
It's interesting. Is that the firm in Grove Street?
No, that was Robertson's. The J&R Glens were on the Lawn Market.
Lawn Market, right.
And it would have been old Andrew Ross that did that job on the pipes. So he played that bagpipe his entire competing career and won all his stuff on it. And then I remember he gave me the pipes in, what year was it? It was in 1981. And him and I, along with Bill Livingston and Ed and I, were teaching a summer school in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. And he played a recital on the pipes, and when he finished, he played the McGregor's Salute, and when he finished, he called me up from the audience and he handed over the pipes in front of everyone, which was a really nice moment.
Quite a formal presentation.
Yeah, I mean, he'd obviously had this whole thing planned. I had no idea, you know, and because the pipes had been a great thing in our family growing up. And they weren't in the house very often because they were always up in the castle. So he handed over the pipes, and he gave me everything except the bass drone reed. And he had claimed that this bass drone reed was the secret to the pipes, that he couldn't, the next set of pipes that he was going to play, he had to keep the bass drone. And as a matter of fact, if I could just, I could just reach up here, if I can, this is the bass drone reed in question.
And it's still as clean as a whistle, isn't it?
Well, the funny thing was he kept it, and it's quite a special thing to me. And he kept it, and he played it. He played this for the rest of his days. But he did phone me up when I was in Canada, and he said to me, he said, "You'll never guess what's happened." And I thought he was going to tell me it was a death in the family. So I picked up the pipes today, and the bass drone reed is no more. And he said it with such gravity in his voice. And the funny thing was after he died, I came across in this room actually the bass drum reed. I actually played it for another 5 or 6 years because I didn't see anything wrong with it. So there's the reed anyway.
So, but he was quite a particular man about his bagpipe.
Oh yes, he was amazingly detailed about the sound. And I remember one thing that brought it home to me how detailed on the sound he was. Again, we were teaching a seminar thing together in Philadelphia one year, and I was doing a thing in reeds, and he was finished his part. He was in another part of this hotel, and he'd finished up, and I was doing this presentation, and he snuck in to the back of the room, which made me very apprehensive. I'd never done anything in front of him like this before, although I was quite experienced at it at the time, you know. And I was showing them about reeds and all this kind of thing, and I'd had the bagpipe. And I'd taken the drone out to show the drone reed, you know. And so after, when the thing had finished, you know, he came up to me and he wasn't very pleased, and he says, that drone's not going to be steady for weeks now. He says, you shouldn't. When I had these pipes, I didn't see the drone reeds for months, and he was right. He was right about that, and he felt just taking it out like that and showing it was an unnecessary thing to do. So that's just how detailed he was about.
He must have been quite a dry blower then, if that's the case.
He was one of those guys, I think, that was quite lucky in that he always played a sheepskin bag just with the little cork and the little copper tube in it, and I think the level of moisture he was putting into the pipes was, some people are lucky, and that's what he never had any problems.
I got a wee theory about that, moan wee stupid theory, that sometimes it's the way you're putting your lips and your teeth when you're blowing into the blow stick. Some folk grip the blow stick with their teeth, for instance, and I think they're wet blowers.
That's an interesting...
Whereas if you grip it with your lips, if your teeth, no, behind the lips, then you're forming almost a bulwark against moisture going down the blowpipe. That's my theory.
I wouldn't doubt that, because I've often wondered what the heck it is that causes people to be wet blowers and dry blowers, and I've always considered myself to be a fairly dry blower. And everybody's body temperature apparently is the same, and you know, some people have terrific problems, of course, with, particularly in those days, with no synthetics, all that kind of thing.
It's an interesting thing for the viewers, but I digress there, sorry. What I was wanting to draw out here was your father's progression from a seaforth, if you like, through to Edinburgh Castle.
Right.
Can you take me there?
Well, when Willie Ross retired, they had a decision to make as to what the future of the Army School was going to be. And as I understand it, it was on a bit of an informal basis where the Pipers'Persuasion Society were involved in paying Willie Ross, who was retired from the Army at the time. And that was the sort of basis that the school was running on. So it was a collaboration between the British Army and the Pipers'Persuasion Society. And when Willie Ross retired, they decided, I think the two people possibly most in the centre of the decision making was Colonel David Murray and Major General Frank Richardson, I think, amongst others. I think Colonel Murray on the Army side and General Richardson on the Pipers'Persuasion Society side of things, they decided to formalise the thing, and my father was chosen to be the chief instructor, was the title at the time, of this new Army School of Piping. And that was a happening that of course changed things for our family a great deal, because at the time he was up in Dingwall, where I was born, and it was just after I was born. I was born in 1958, which was a pretty good year for him, because that was the year that he won the two big Peewer competitions and the two former winners' matches being reels at Oban-in-Inverness, which nobody else...
It's a clean sweep all in the 1 year.
And a clean sweep all in the 1 year,
My
which
goodness.
nobody else has done in the history of piping. And I like to think that me coming along that year was a pretty good omen. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, good.
But anyway, we were in Dingwall at the time, and you know, my father was on the point of retiring from the Army at that time, and he'd been considered for a position in Belgium, believe it or not, as a harbour master somewhere in Belgium. And so that was where we were apparently destined until the Army School of Piping job he was selected for that. And that was he started in 1959. First course, so I had people like Pipe Major Angus MacDonald.
Yes.
Joe Wilson. Maybe.
Joe Wilson,
to name two. And so then we moved down to Edinburgh, and we lived in a place called Ramsay Garden, which was right at the bottom of the castle. It's a magnificent building, a magnificent house, which came with the job, which was terrific. And my sister and I, as children, grew up there in the family, and my father had the job in the castle, and it was absolutely fantastic at the time. And looking back on it all now, I feel quite privileged to have been part of all that, you know. And I went to school nearby, and you know, my father became the director of British Army bagpipe music commissioned to the rank of lieutenant in 1967, I believe, and eventually to captain when he retired in 1974.
Right.
At age 55, I think.
I am going to cut in a wee story with your father here. 1970 Commonwealth Games,
Yes, yeah.
and I was in the Glasgow Police Pipe Band under Ronnie Laurie, and Angus MacDonald had given up the pipe major's job there, 67, but was still hovering about the fringes as band president or whatever, the link with the band and the chief, that sort of thing. So we turned up Redford Barracks for the rehearsal on the Monday, prior to the Commonwealth Games on the Saturday, the opening. Friday, Saturday, doesn't matter. 5 police bands from all over Scotland, 5 army bands, 10 bands, formation marching, Grand Parade Square, making thistles, Highland dancers, all that sort of stuff. Fantastic. And your father had all this stuff in his head.
Yes.
He was a man.
Yes.
And I don't know his rank, it might have been captain even at that point, I'm not sure. I think it probably was. So his introduction that day was, right gentlemen, because there's no one in the parade ground, that was it. 2 things I have to say to you, in the big booming voice, first thing is, Chief Inspector Angus MacDonald, kindly take yourself off my parade ground. I'm in charge here. I says, and I don't wish to see you the rest of the week. Good day to you.
Really?
So that was him vanquished,
Amazing.
So there was a wee bit of a cheer from our ranks there, Angus MacDonald, a good guy, but he wasn't that popular, But that was the nature of the thing. And then the next instruction was drummers. The next time I hear a drum being struck without my express permission, the person responsible will be locked up overnight.
Very good. Well, I do remember that. I remember the planning for that. I would have forgotten all about it at Commonwealth Games, and I remember he used to sit down with charts and paper and get all that working, whether it was a thistle. He used to do things at that time too, like a salter.
Andrew's Cross, all that sort of stuff.
For different things that were going, and he worked it all out, however he was going to march.
We'd walk through this for days and then, but long before we even get pipes or drums out to walk through it. And woe betide you if you forgot your place in the parade ground.
I understand that. I've heard a few stories.
Good stuff, So, how many years was your father director of piping then?
Well, he would have been at the school, as I say, from 59 to 74. So, 15 years.
Right. I'm going to jump off that one. His competitions, his Peter competitions. Yes. Tell me a wee bit about that, please.
Well, he became interested in Peter composition possibly the early 1960s, and he'd made 1 or 2 tunes, and modern Peebricks have always been the type of thing that many people have made very, very good tunes, and they don't tend to get played all that much. I'm not exactly sure why that is. In 1963 he produced a tune called The Phantom Piper of Corryarrick Pass, which invariably those things were composed around a compositional competition. That was the catalyst for making some of those tunes. And The Phantom Piper of Corryarrick was one of his first successful ones, and won this thing called the Salter Society Award. And then he went on to he composed 13 Peebricks in all, but the Phantom Piper is the one that became his best known composition, although there's 3 or 4 others that are equally as good. And he made tunes for different occasions. Sometimes he was commissioned to write a pirogue. Things like Salute to the Pipers'Persuasion Society. There's a bound Pipers'Persuasion Society collection up there that was given to him by the Pipers'Persuasion Society in recognition of that. Another excellent tune called Farewell to the Queen's Ferry, which was composed to commemorate the opening of the Forth Road Bridge in 1964. I mean, I remember as a kid looking out my bedroom window from the castle, and I could see that bridge coming together as the months went by, and it literally joined in the middle.
Aye.
And I would have been about 6 when that bridge was completed. But I do remember crossing, as I'm sure you do, crossing. It's amazing to think now how you could line up cars and wait for ferries when you see that bridge in action now. And rather tragically, that bridge has just about had its lifespan, and we're going to have to build another one.
Can't build another one because they're too busy building tram lines in Edinburgh.
So that's a whole other story, isn't it? So he, and when he retired, he got a lot of. When he retired, and we came to this house here, he had a lot of time on his hands, and so he produced tunes which were very, very sophisticated, and major pieces of pirogue. They weren't small tunes. No. They were quite big tunes, and they were extremely good. Some of which have been recorded, and most of them were very successful tunes in terms of the compositional competitions and that kind of thing.
Don McLeod did something similar, but you never see any of these tunes going down as set tunes, do you? For some reason.
Well, no, and one of the things that I always thought was, now and again the Pipers'Persuasion Society has set tunes, they've set modern tunes, so you get every 7 or 8 years, you get, okay, this year's going to be modern tunes, and it's a wee bit disappointing to me, because that to me creates them as curiosities rather than just
saying it's a tune.
You know, yeah, it's a tune, exactly. Aye. So to my mind, they should come out with a list one year that says, okay, you know, the set tunes this year: Lament for Donald Dhu and Mackay, Lament for the Children, the Phantom Piper of Corryarrick, Field of Gold, or whatever, and just treat them as
tunes.
As tunes.
Aye.
And put them in, because they are. I mean, Donald MacLeod's compositions as well are the equal or better of certainly a lot of the stuff.
There's a lot of stuff in the big books that you just wouldn't play.
Well, you know, some of those tunes, and you know, I've retired from competing now, and of course, but some of these tunes that are set, I mean, the two of us could sit down and make a better tune in the next 10 minutes, to be quite frank, you know.
Well, maybe you could. A wee note here about reed making. I don't want to come in too early with this, because I want to come on to that at the end as well, you know, because I know that you've got an avid interest in reed making, but is there any sort of history of reed making in the family?
Oh yes, there is, and my father started to make reeds, and he was the one that taught me to make reeds. And he started making reeds, I'm thinking about that period of the early 60s, and he started making reeds because he couldn't get reeds. That was quite literally, and looking back to my grandfather, who was a very, very handy guy, he made the tools, some of which I still use to this day. He made the tools, and my father was extremely adept at the whole thing of reedsmanship and the whole adjustment of reeds. And in those days, of course, you didn't have the technologies that we've got today, so it was very much little hand jigs and chisels and all this kind of thing.
And wouldn't be using the same amount of tape that we're using now.
No, they didn't. And the whole issue of tape and a chanter was my father. He often felt that if the hole was more than an eighth covered, I remember him saying, well, then you should get yourself another reed that suits better. And there was only on his chanter a wee bit in the F, maybe the D or something. And if there was any more than just a sliver of tape, they would say, no, that reed doesn't suit the chanter. And so things have changed in that regard, where the use of tape and tuning is much more prevalent now.
Right. talk about yourself now. You started learning piping at what age?
I started learning piping at the age of 7 or 8. I started...
Did your father teach you?
No, he didn't. No. I was sent to a school called George Heriot's School, which was a shortish walk from the castle. And I remember when I started, there was a pipe band in the school, and the pipe teacher of the school was a gentleman called Jack Crichton, who I'm sure you'll recall, Alan, from the RSPBA.
Mm-hmm.
He's very active in the Knightswood Juveniles and as an adjudicator in, well, what would have been the SPBA at the time. Anyway, I remember when I was about 7 or 8, he came into the class and he used to do these tours once a year to recruit boys to learn.
Right.
And he came in and he said, right, well, here's the pipes, and he played a tune, and he said, does anybody want to learn? And I remember saying, I remember this quite clearly. I said, oh, geez, your father's the director of Army Bagpipe Music, you better stick your hand up, you know. So there was a whole lot of hands went up to start learning, and he sent us away with these little sticks that he had that were, he was actually the technical teacher in the school. We called it woodworking these days.
Right.
He made up these little sticks with holes bored in them, and he showed us how to put our hands in the chanter, and I think he showed us the scale, and he said, now go away and come back next week and I'll select the boys who get on the best with showing me the scale. And I was absolutely terrified, because I thought, geez, you know, if he doesn't choose me, it'll be a bit of a shame on the family, you know. So I went away and practiced like hell in this little stick for a week. And I didn't tell my father or my parents anything about it, because I was so afraid that I wouldn't be one of the ones chosen. And in actual fact, when I look back on it all now, my father was a great friend of Jack Crichton's, and I don't think there was any chance at all that I wouldn't have been chosen. But I didn't know that at the time. But anyway, I remember when the next week he read out the list of boys that were going to get the lessons, and I was fortunately one of them. And Jack Crichton taught me right up until I was the age of 14 or 15. He was an excellent teacher.
Good.
An excellent piping set up in the schools, although that wasn't, it was all done part-time after the school days. It was a band practice, and I went to him for a lesson, half-hour lesson once a week. And I got on very, very well with Jack, and he was quite a powerful man in the school. He was assistant to the headmaster, and if you were in with him and you were one of his boys, so to speak, you got away with quite a bit. You got to do things that the others didn't, you know.
Did you cover Pibroch as well as the light music?
No, not with Jack. And when I started to play Pibroch, that would have been my first sort of real lessons with my father. Quite informal. And what happened, I got my start playing Pibroch. My father had been teaching two boys called John and Robert Frater, who went to the Edinburgh Academy and came up to the house at the castle once a week after school. And one day my father came to me and he said, look, it's about time you started learning Pibroch. And I would have been about 12 or 13 at the time. He says, you can sit in with John and Robert's lessons and learn that way. And I remember the first tune was a little spree. And I was completely lost. I didn't know what the heck was going on. And sitting in on John and Robert's lessons wasn't a great success in actual fact. And my father said, well, look, we'll start between you and me. And he taught me the tune. And thereafter, the lessons, we'd never had, being a family situation, we never had formal lessons. I'd be up, after we moved into this house, I'd be practicing in this room. And father would be downstairs. And, you know, when I was finished, he would, maybe around the dinner table or something, oh yeah, I was listening to that, you might think about doing this, that, or the next thing.
So it's bits and pieces of lessons, right?
It was all the time. It was a constant. It was a constant source of advice.
Right.
So we never. I don't recall ever actually sitting down with him for a formal lesson.
When did you start competing?
I started competing when I was about 15 in the amateur competitions. The usual route, the SPA amateurs, I didn't compete very much. There was an excellent competition run by Bert Barron up in St Andrews, which was rather grandly named the Scottish Junior Championship, and I went up there and I was successful there. One of the medals I have downstairs, Bert was quite a high class dealer in antiques, and he used to go and buy all these magnificent medals and have them repolished, whatever engraving was on them taken off and redone. And I've managed to win a few of those medals, which are lovely things. And one of them, in actual fact, I found out later, is a Scottish FA Cup winners medal for the Pearock there. Because I found this out because I'm a bit of quite interested in football. One of my tours in the Ibrox Trophy Room, I saw a lineup of these winners medals from one of the past Rangers players, and this I recognised as a very intricate medal, and I recognised it as a Scottish FA Cup winners medal. So that's what.
So he buffed it down and re-engraved it.
Yes, exactly. So that was the amateur career, and shortly after that I left school and I went to work for Gordon Stobo at Highland House in the Lawn Market, which was great fun. Gordon was great fun. You remember Gordon was great. And
that ride for Barracks we I'm talking about was spent 4 o'clock. That was after things were done. You always ended up in Gordon Stobo's shop.
Oh, it was a real the famous pipers that went in there was incredible. And also that was the time I started going to the Eagle Piper Society up in the West End Hotel, and I don't think my father was very keen on me going up there because he was afraid of the kind of people I'd meet. I think he thought there was all kinds of things happening up there.
Bad influences, alcohol and stuff. Terrible.
And I think there was a few people around the Edinburgh pipe scene at the time he wasn't keen that I meet at all. But I got to the age of about 15 or 16 and I just said to him, look, I'm bloody well going. And that's the end of it. And I remember leaving, it was in this house, and I remember leaving, and he says, now make sure you're home by 10 o'clock and you watch yourself and only one drink and all this kind of thing. And I remember I went for this first night to the West End Hotel, and the night was coming to an end and the shutters in the bar went down and I was about to leave, and as I got up to leave, Neil Robertson, the proprietor, sort of put his hand on my shoulder and slammed me back down, and he says, you're not leaving. And I didn't have a clue what was going on. And after about half an hour the shutter in the bar came up again. Quite often some of the guys from the Edinburgh Police Band would come in at that point, the curtains would close and the night would continue after licensing hours. And you know, my father wasn't very pleased, so I arrived home in a bit of a state my first night from, as he predicted, from the Eagle Pipers about 2 in the morning. I came and found the door locked, and I had to ring the bell to get in, and of course he says, see, I told you this would happen if I let you go to the Eagle Pipers.
The flame of wrath, Yes. But that is the famous Eagle Pipers, and tell me more about the Eagle Pipers.
Well, it was a great place for us to go at that age because we were getting to be interested in competing, and we'd go and play in the amateur competitions around the games, and quite often we'd have a wee go of playing in the Open as well when we were about 17 or 18. And sometimes you'd get prizes all right in the amateur competitions, but it was great to be able to maybe nip in with a fourth or something with some of the big boys, which was great. And the Eagle Pipers was just fantastic for going up and meeting people and playing your tunes in front of people.
Yeah.
Appreciative audience, some very famous people going to the society at that time. And you really practiced for it. I mean, I remember practicing in this room and getting wee sets together to play. You didn't want to play anything you'd played the previous week or month or anything else, and you got a chance to practice the tunes you'd be playing around the games.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was working in Gordon's shop, Pint Major Angus MacDonald came in, and he says, right, he says, I've been talking to Gordon, he says, and I'm taking you around the games this week. And he said, we're going to Luss and Tobermory and I'm not sure it was that circuit, Inverary, all that kind of thing. And I said to Angus, I said, look, that would be great. He says, we're going to Hugh McInnes and Gavin Stoddart, he says, and that would be great. I said, well, my father will never allow me to go to the games with you. And Angus said to Gordon Stoddart, he says, phone John up, phone him right now and ask him. And I said, you're wasting your time. So Gordon phoned and he said, look John, he says, Angus is here and he's taking Colin around the games, is that all right? And remarkably he said yes, and I had to go home and get my kill. And I always remember that, it was about a week we went away, and Angus had the keys to all kinds of army drill halls to stay at night.
That's amazing, eh?
Oh, it was, and he was in great form at the time. He won all the first prizes. He ended up the week winning all the first prizes bar one, which I remember he was playing his finger stuck in the whirl hole for one, and he got second. Gavin got most of the seconds, Hugh McInnes got almost all of the thirds, and I, of course, got nothing. But it was a great experience, and Angus was terrific, because he was always going, we'd go to the next game, and he'd right Colin, you're going to get a prize today, right? You know, and it was a great experience. So I was very lucky. That was the sort of start of competing and all that kind of thing.
But you would see how they prepared themselves just immediately before going on to the boards.
Absolutely. I mean, I just remember that whole week as being a terrific experience in seeing how it was done. Those guys at the time were right at the top of the tree, and listening. I was very lucky at the time because I was very keen about going and listening to competitions, and growing up the way I did, I was very, very lucky being around great pipers all the time, getting this constant stream of advice from my father, and picking up stuff all over the place.
Right.
And I was very lucky. Looking back on it, I was really lucky.
We know you went to Canada.
Yes.
But before we go there, did you get any sort of major prizes here in Salt Pipe before you went there?
No, I didn't really. I'd had a few prizes around the games, but I mean, I was just 18, I think, when I went to Canada.
What took you there?
Well, I was invited to go there to teach piping, and one of the things that I'd experienced just before going was I'd met all these Canadian guys who were coming over. You'll remember the times that Bob Worrell and Bill Livingston, Ed Nye, these types of people were coming over here and starting to be very, very successful. And I think it was through Gordon Stowell's shop. They all came into Gordon's, and I got to know some of them really quite well. And I suppose looking back at it, I was at a bit of a loose end, and a couple of them suggested, oh, why don't you come to Canada and do a little bit of teaching, see the place, and so the school I went to was the Thousand Islands School of Scottish Performing Arts in Brockville, Ontario, and I went out there, and I had no intention of staying for 22 years, which I did. It was just an adventure, you know, and I remember coming back after this plan had been hatched and saying to my father and mother, well, look, I'm going to Canada, you know, and so again, to my surprise, I thought they would throw up their hands and say, no, you're not doing that, it's far too far away and you're far too young. They sort of said, well, I know, it's pretty good, you know. And so I went, and one thing led to another, and I ended up staying there.
And when you were across there, you're teaching, of course, as you've just explained, but you went out to various pipe bands across there. What was the first band across there?
Yeah, it was geographically where I was in Brockville, Ontario, was about 220 miles from the city of Toronto, which at the time was the real centre of what was happening in Canada. Things hadn't developed with SFU in Vancouver at that time, and so Toronto was the area that was the hotbed. So at the time, Bill Livingston had the City of Toronto Pipe Band, which was an amazing band because they were playing. They'd constructed a couple of medleys. A guy called Jerry Quigg had made 2 medleys for them, which was centred around the playing of Pier. One was what was called the Desperate Battle medley, and the other was centred around Mackintosh's Lament. They were both absolutely terrific medleys, and I heard this band, and I said, I want to play with that band. I'd never played in a pipe band before, apart from the school pipe band, and so I went and joined the City of Toronto pipe band, and I had a great time there for only 1 or 2 years. The band came across here and competed. It won the competition in Princess Street Gardens, you remember that one?
Yes.
With that Desperate Battle medley. And then, sadly to say, the band, it's one of these things where the band folded for different reasons. After a trip to Scotland, I don't know what happened, but suddenly there wasn't any band. But Bill persevered with it and started the General Motors Pipe Band, which developed into the 78th Fraser Highlanders. Now, I was too far away from Toronto to play with the 78s at that time. I always wanted to, because I mean they were just fantastic, especially in that early period. And I had my own things in Canada. I got into, I was teaching piping in 3 high schools in Glengarry County, and I taught a lot of people there and developed into a grade 2 band called the Glengarry Pipe Band. We were very successful in North America with these kids that I taught. Some of who now are great friends of mine. Most people were all about 10 years younger than me. So I'd have been about 25 and they'd have been about 15. But now I'm 52 and they're 42. So it's
compressed a wee bit.
Yeah, exactly. So that band came across and got 4th in grade 2 at the World's Championship in the middle 80s. And then around 1997, I think it was, or 1996, I thought, right, let's go and play with 78. So I approached Bill and I said, look, you know, is it okay to come and play with the band? And what happened with Glengarry at the time, again, it was one of these pipe band things where Glengarry had started out, they didn't compete, but then they started competing in grade 4, and they won grade 4, and they won grade 3, and they won grade 2, and they were promoted by the Piper Society of Ontario to grade 1. Didn't actually compete in grade 1 because the drum corps fell apart. And so at that point I said, well, let's go and fulfill this wish of mine to play with Livingston in the 78th. And at the time they had a terrific band at that time. It was very, very strong. In fact, they had I think it was 7 or 8 people who had previously been pipe majors in grade 1 bands themselves.
For goodness sake.
Why? It was, I mean, counting Bill himself, there was people like, just off the top of my head, there's people like Bill himself, Ken Eller, pipe major of Clan McFarlane, Jake Watson, being the pipe major of the Toronto Police, Bruce McLean, being the pipe major of McNish Distillery. I was technically counted one because my band had been promoted to grade 1. John Cairns had been pipe major of the London band. Scott Sayer. Bruce Gandy was the pipe sergeant of the 78s at the time. So anyway, I think it was 8. So it was an extraordinarily strong band. And the 3 years I played with them, they won every competition that they played in North America. Played really well at the World's 4th. But the best I ever remember them playing was in '98, I think it was. They played a medley that was constructed around The Old Wife and the Mill Dust. And they had a terrific, terrific medley. The band was 8th.
Right.
It's just one of those things, you know. We thought we'd a shout of winning it that day, but all the judges didn't think so. But that would have been the best performance.
What year was that?
I think '98. I think it was in '98. And I think what
Vicky Police were doing well at that time.
Was that the year? I think they won.
No, I think they won '99 or something like that.
Yeah, well, this would have been the year before, and I think all that happened, Alan, was it was a perfectly played medley, and the pipes were absolutely great. Somebody made a wee mistake in the intro tune, and I think that probably just...
I had a notion at that time that the 78th pipe band didn't put out a big volume. as a band.
Mhm.
And the other bands were putting out the big sound,
Yes.
so you were suffering result-wise
Yes.
because of that. That was my
Was
theory
it?
at the
Yeah.
time, you know.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Bill about that.
Mhm.
But it's the briefest of conversations, of course.
Well, you know, I mean, that's it. Yeah.
Aye, but you always had a lovely, sweet sound
Yes.
as a band.
Yeah. Well, that
But you
particular
never
day-
flattened the grass.
Yeah, that particular day was when everything clicked. In fact, the week
Aye.
before at Maxville, John Wilson had been over judging,
Yeah.
and we'd played possibly equally as well then. And I remember John's score sheet had 3 words on it. His score sheet said a championship performance.
Aye, aye.
That's all it said.
Aye.
So the band was pretty good at the time.
Aye. But that's the way it is in first grade, of course. It's a tremendous amount of the high quality bands.
It's just those things are decided on by margins that are and reasons that are so thin that it could be anything.
Soul piping in Canada, the competitions, what did you do there?
Well, you know, it was interesting when I first went over because I started playing in the competitions, and they were a different style of competitions than we're used to. We used to go to these Highland Games and there'd be masses of different grades of competitions. Over there they've got grade 4 amateur, grade 4 amateur Pira, grade 3 march, grade 3 jig, all the way up to the open. And they have this system where you arrive at the games in the morning. It starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's 70 degrees at 8 o'clock in the morning already, and you arrive, and they have all these judges' tables dotted around the games field, and everything runs like clockwork because it has to. I mean, they have to get all this over by the time the band competition starts at 1 o'clock. So I started competing there, and I didn't have an awful lot of success, and it was really quite interesting because I wasn't being criticised so much in my playing, but I was heavily criticised on what they termed the thinness of my tone, which was a complete mystery to me at the time. And my father was sort of on the phone, and he was very supportive, my father, and he would never get on to me or anything, but he said, you know what, I would have expected you to have been getting prizes amongst the people you're competing against. And I said, well, I don't know why, they're all saying my pipes are thin. And he said, well, if they're saying your pipes are thin, they must be thin. And I said, well, don't know about that. So he came over to teach in the summer, and he said, well, let's hear this thin bagpipe, you know.
Aye.
He blew it up, and he says, there's nobody can have a better bagpipe than that. So I was the first competition I won in Canada was at the Hamilton Niagara branch of the Pipers'Persuasion Society, and it was a March to Spain real competition, and the judges were behind the screen. And that was the very first prize I won. It was the first prize in the March to Spain Real, and all the big boys were there. And as it turns out later, they thought I was Jim McGilvery. And so that was quite interesting. And then that summer I came across to Scotland, and I won the gold medal in Inverness. And after that, I didn't have any problem with saying that my pipes were
Thin bagpipes, not rubbish.
And that was when I first started winning prizes.
What did you play in the gold medal?
I played Lament for the Viscount of Dundee, and the gold medal that I won at Inverness was quite interesting because they decided as an experiment that they would only have one sole judge, and that judge was meant to be Pipe Major Donald MacLeod. And sadly, he died about 2 months before, and so they thought, you know, there was a bit of, as there always is with judging, controversy or whatever, and they thought, well, let's go to this system where you have one judge, and on the other side of the stage you have a reader to check that you play all the notes right. And so the theory was that, you know, the reader would say to the judge after each performance, right, no mistakes, and then so the judge could, the theory was, sit back and purely not be bothered about whether the person missed a line or a note or anything, just judge the performance. And so the Pipe Major Donald MacLeod's replacement was John D. Burgess. He judged the competition on his own, and I played a pretty good tune, and I thought I was in with a chance at the time. I knew I was capable of playing at that level. Pipe Major Angus MacDonald was in the competition, and he played last.
Aye.
And all day, after I'd played my tune, I thought, you know, it's going to be taken away at the death here.
Aye.
And I went, and I wanted to hear Angus, and I didn't quite get into the hall on time, so I had to hear him from behind the doors, and it sounded magnificent.
Aye.
And after he finished playing, I thought, well, it's, you know, that's it. And a short while later, I was hanging around the Eden Court Theatre, and John Burgess brushed by and said, "Well done, Colin Roy," and off he went.
Aye.
Well, this sounds quite good, you know.
Aye.
And then Ross Martin, the secretary, came up and approached me with the card and just showed me the card. I had my name in it. And of course, I suppose like all people that win the gold medal, it's something that you never forget, you know, because it's the moment that your life has changed. And of course, I wanted to tell my father, you know. And, you know, sometimes Scottish people can be quite funny and quite stoic, you know. And I saw him, and he was actually in the bar with Angus MacDonald, and they were having a great chin wag, and I felt, geez, there's Angus there, you know. I don't want to make a big deal about this because he was playing in the competition and might be disappointed himself, you know, but I mean, I was over the moon. So I went up to them, and they were having a drink, and they were in this terrific, intense conversation about Peebrick, and I was waiting for a wee pause, and eventually there was a wee pause, and I said to my father, I said, you know, I says, you're not the only gold medalist in the family anymore, you know. And he looked at me and he says, oh, he says, that's grand, well done. And then he went on with the conversation. And Angus went, well done. And then we went on with the conversation. And I'm sure he was bursting with pride at the time, but it was just...
He wasn't going to let that one out.
No.
So that was the medal. How about the other one?
Well, the other one was a wee bit longer in coming. I didn't compete. I wasn't one of these people that made a point of coming every single year to compete. In fact, I didn't come back to Scotland after '82 to compete until 1986. It was the first time I played in the Open Peebrick at Oban, and I got second to Donald McPherson in that competition. So I think I'd played at Oban not all that many times, and it wasn't until '92 that I won the gold medal at the Argyllshire Gathering, which was 10 years later. And I remember I had my great friend Ewan Anderson with me. We went up to Oban together, and I played a pretty good tune. I played the Blue Ribbon.
Right.
And Seamus McNeill and Willie MacDonald Benbeckula were judging. And as I left the hall, I heard Willie MacDonald sort of, it was a bit of a bellow, you know how he used to talk. He says, I heard him say, that was a good tune. So I said, oh, that sounds pretty good, you know. So I thought, well, I'm in with a shout here, and Ewan and I went off to the bed and breakfast, and we're with Martin Kessler, the German piper, and we did an awful thing. We consumed a bottle of whiskey between the three of us. We went to sleep. We went to sleep in this bed and breakfast, and when we woke up, it was dark, and Ewan said, you see all these people walking down the street, they know who's won the gold medal, and you don't, so we'd better go up there to the Corn Halls and find out. So I said, well, we'll know as soon as we walk in, because people come up to you and say, you know, well done and all that. And so we went up to the Corn Halls, and the March to Spain Wheel was going on at the time, and nobody said a bloody thing, and I thought, that's I guess I got nothing. You know, then I was right down in the dumps about it, because I said, you know how you get. And I've sat there for about 15 minutes. You know, people were talking to me, and I thought, I can't believe this, I got nothing for that tune, you know. And then after somebody had finished playing, Gavin Stoddart poked me in the back. He was sitting behind me, and he says, well done, by the way, for today. You know? I said, what are you well doning me for? You know, and it's quite, you know. And he says, well, you know, it's a gold medal, you know. And I actually said to him, I says, well, Gavin, I don't know. What did I get in the gold medal? You know. He says, well, you won it. I says, oh, thank God for that. That's that's how I found out about that. So you know, I remember coming across, and my father would say to me when I played in the gold medal, "Now, just remember, you've got to remember the one gold medal's as good as the two, you know." But then, of course, when my father died the year before, I got the second one, and so I was quite happy about that.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. Did you go on and do anything in any of the clasp tunes? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I played in the clasp a few times, and I had good experiences there. I got prizes in the clasp. I never won the clasp, which is just fine because it's a pretty hard thing to win.
What about the Glenfiddich?
Glenfiddich, I played at the Glenfiddich 7 times. Won some prizes in the Peabrook there.
Aye.
The Glenfiddich was a great occasion. Privileged to play there.
Aye,
on the stage.
It's a wonderful day.
Last month I judged it at Glenfiddich.
Yes.
Which was a great honour as well.
Aye. It's a wonderful setting really for the whole day. London, did you do anything down at London?
Prizes in the Bratton Gorm, that kind of thing. Silver Chanter, I won the Silver Chanter a couple of times, which was a great thing, because I remember when I was young sitting in the audience, I remember hearing Murray Henderson win the Silver Chanter in 1975.
Dunvegan Castle.
Dunvegan Castle, and I never ever thought, to be quite honest, that I would ever get to play there.
It's a wonderful setting, isn't it?
It's the greatest place in the world to play the pipes.
Aye.
To play in that room.
Yes.
And so I was lucky enough to get invited, and I was able. I got the Silver Chanter the first year I played in it, which was a great thing, a great honour. And again, you know, you phone home and phoned the old boy, you know, and it was just before he died actually. You know, I said, well, I had quite a good run that summer. I'd won quite a lot of important Peabrook competitions in Canada. I'd won the gold bar to the Peabrook Society gold medal, and I won the North American Championship in Peabrook. One of these plaques there, and then I came across and I'd won the Dunvegan medal the night before, you know, and my father had been saying, "Oh, you're playing pretty well, you know." And then I was lucky enough to get the Silver Chanter, so I phoned down, you know, and I remember he was quite delighted about that.
Tremendous.
And I remember coming back to the house, and I thought to myself, you know, it'll be quite interesting to see what he does here. And I rang the doorbell there, and I'm standing there with a thing under the arm. It's in a glass case, you know, and I knew exactly what he would do. He came downstairs. "Oh, great having you home." And he picked up my case, and he could hardly lift it because he wasn't very well at the time. He insisted on taking my case up the stairs, and nary a look at this Silver Chanter. So in we get to the house, and this is the Scottish stoicism type of thing, not wanting to go overboard with him. So I got up on the landing and I thought, what am I going to do with this thing, you know? And I thought, well, okay, he's not said anything, I'll go and put it in the living room, you know? And we had dinner, you know, and still nothing was really said, you know, and after dinner, when my mother was getting the coffee ready, I noticed that he went through the living room and had a wee look at it, you know.
Good.
Came back in, never said a thing. Well, he died shortly after it, and one of the sort of sad, happy things was he was a great photographer. My father, he took photographs of everything, you know, and there was a reel left in the camera after he died, and I went and got it developed, of course, and the whole reel was photographs of the Silver Chanter.
Great. Well, that showed you what you really thought.
Yeah, exactly.
That's tremendous. That's excellent. And you come back from Canada.
Well, I came back from Canada. What had happened in Canada was, you know, I'd done various things there, done a lot of teaching of piping and school systems there, and I'd worked in the schools quite extensively, and I got a gee to I was involved in the reed making business too, and I got a gee to actually wanting to become a teacher. So I went to university at Carleton University in Ottawa, and gained a degree in political science, and then I went to Teachers College in St Catharines, and got myself qualified as a teacher. And I did teach for a very short time, until I discovered that it was far more work than teaching the bagpipes. So they'd offered me my old job back, teaching piping again, which I was delighted to accept. So that's what I did. And then I got a call in about 1999 from Roddy McLeod at the Pipers'Persuasion Centre, and Roddy had said that, you know, we were setting up the degree program, and we would like you to come with your sort of educational background to help set this degree up, which was great at the time, because I never intended Canada to be an absolute permanent thing. At that time I'd spent more than half of my life in Canada, and very much learned a lot of my piping in Canada, a lot of my life's experiences in Canada. Jenny and I talked it over. She was delighted to come, the time seemed right, and we came back to Glasgow, and I started working at the National Pipe Centre, which was a great thing, because at the time the centre was just getting going. It was trying to get on its financial feet. I'd only been open a couple of years. The people there at the time were terrific people to work with. There was, unfortunately, Pipe Major Angus MacDonald had just died, and it was just after that. But Greg Wilson was there from New Zealand. Roddy, of course, himself. Jim McLean was there. Willie Morrison was there. Dougie Pincock was there, and it's a terrific time working with those guys. Later on, Gordon Walker arrived, and it was intense periods of working out programs, of working on the educational aspect of getting the pipes taught. And one of the things that was good about the centre was learning. We wrote the tutor book all together. We used to have time set aside once a week, a morning, where we would all put our ideas in and develop chapters of the tutor book. So that was done at that time, and that's a great collaboration of a lot of people's wide experiences. And Angus's, a lot of Angus's ideas are in that book as well, because Angus had done work in it before he unfortunately died. So then what happened was I got a call from the Lothian and Borders Police Pipe Band, who weren't in very good shape at the time, and they had been just relegated to grade 2, and asked me to take over as pipe major. Jerry and I thought our days in pipe bands had essentially been over, and when I got that call, the Lothian Borders Police Pipe Band means a great deal to me through my upbringing in Edinburgh at the time. And we decided that that was something that we'd like to do. So I took over the police band, and in doing so I had a lot of commitments in Edinburgh. My mother lived in Edinburgh in this house, and she was not well. She needed a lot of looking after. Friends in Edinburgh, growing up in Edinburgh, and then taking over the police band. And there was 1 week, Alan, that 1 week to 7 days, I made 8 trips to Edinburgh in 7 days. So it was a trip every day, plus I actually went twice one day. So when I realised that was happening, I said, you know, it's about time that we need to get back to Edinburgh. And the Edinburgh Academy invited me to take over their position as instructor of piping at Edinburgh Academy. So that seemed, I was sad to leave the centre. I was there for 1.5 years. But the job had essentially been done in developing the degree programme. And so that was in place, and it was time to move on. It was one of those opportunities comes up, and in terms of your personal life, it was the right thing to do at that time.
And then had an interest also in the competing Pipers Association.
Well, at that same time, when I came over, I was approached if I was interested in becoming the president of the Competing Pipers Association, and I thought about that, and I said, well, there's various things there that I was interested in. The position was not uncontested. Pipe Major Brian Donaldson ran for the position as well as I did, and it was a very, very close vote. In fact, I believe that I was the winner of the vote by one. A very good turnout at the AGM, and Brian very graciously agreed to be the vice president, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
So Brian and I got together and said, well, there's a few things we'd like to do and achieve here. And it was a period of controversy, particularly where the judging of piping was concerned, because it was in those days where there was a great deal of a great section of the judging bench was not judging. People like John Burgess, Hugh McCallum, John McDougall, names like that were for various reasons were not judging, and we wanted to build a bridge between the Joint Committee for judging and what was called the APA at the time. We wanted to be the go-between and get these people judging, basically at all costs. We thought it was ridiculous that they were not judging, and so it was a fraught period of in the administration of pipe in there.
Mm-hmm.
Happily, when the whole thing shook down, as you like, these people came back to judging, and we are very proud of that achievement. It was achieved in tandem with everybody else on the Joint Committee for judging, but if we had not pushed for it, it would not have happened.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very stable now for years, hasn't it?
It has been, and it seems like it's an era of cooperation and agreement which has been missing for since that period of the unfortunate CPA boycott and all that kind of thing.
Well,
Academy, I was there for 7 years, and I greatly enjoyed my time at the Edinburgh Academy. They were very good to me. One day I woke up and I realised I was just about to be 50 years of age, and I reckon that's about the time you tend to start looking back and not forward, and you know, I thought to myself, you know, I don't want to be doing this when I'm suddenly I'm going to be 60, and I'm going to say, it was just becoming too much the same. It was becoming pupil after pupil, and I thought to myself, no, you know, great job. I had about 16 weeks of paid holidays. It was marvellous. But I thought, no, there's a few things I want to do with my life, and so I talked to Jenny, and I said, you know, we agreed, well, let's do something else. So at the time at Edinburgh Academy, I got interested in reed making, because technologies had greatly increased in the field of reed making, and has made things exceptionally easy for pipers compared with previous years. And the reeds today are so good that you can literally just give a reed a squeeze and stick it in a channel and go play. That has become the art of reedsmanship. Give your reed a squeeze. That's about all you need to do. So the whole business of the wee tricks, all this kind of thing, is getting lost. Because the reeds are so much better. But to cut a long story short, there was a technical teacher at the academy who took an interest in what I was doing, and he said, well, I can make you that, and I can do this for you, and I can do anything you want. So I thought, well, this is great, because this gives me a chance to jump in technology-wise once more. He made all the stuff for me, and I started making the reeds again. And one of the things I'm also very interested in is home renovations. A couple of years ago, I renovated our family home from top to bottom, and everything you see in this room here is my work. So you can, whether you think it's any good or not, it's
tremendous.
So, you know, in my time, I've renovated a lot of houses, and I thought, well, I think I would like to do a bit of that while I still can. and so I've been involved in a couple of renovations along with the reed making. The reed making is a thing I greatly enjoy, but only in not, I don't want to be chained to a reed bench. You can easily, there's a great demand for reeds, and you can end up just being chained to
You
it.
get into a numbers game, don't you?
And it's pretty tedious.
Aye.
If you allow it to be, you
Yeah.
know, if you make them in great quantities. So I thought, well, what can I be doing here? And so I left the academy with the intention of doing a number of things, adjudicating competitions, the reed making, house renovation, summer schools. I thought there's all kinds of stuff I could be doing here,
Yeah.
and not be tied down, and
Aye.
have a really interesting, active life.
Uh-huh.
So at the moment I'm quite happy doing that. In fact, today I had an offer accepted on a flat down here in Stockbridge that I'm going to get tearing at very shortly. And since I left the academy, the market's been pretty flat, and it hasn't been as buoyant as I'd have liked. But I enjoy doing that kind of stuff, and it's nice to see the completed work at the end. So that and the teaching, I don't teach many people, but I really enjoy teaching people. My father has left a resource in this room that's probably not available anywhere else in the world in terms of tape recordings. There is possibly, I reckon, about 700 or 800 hours of live recordings of different people. Some of those that we have digitized now. Cameron Drummond, who's a pupil of mine, was spent all last summer working on my father's stuff. So that's a resource that I want to pass on to people in the same way that it was passed on to me.
Excellent.
Different styles of playing. Let your pupils hear all the different ways of playing. Let them put themselves into the tune and pick out what they like. That's the way I was taught, that's the way I learned, and that's what I'd like to keep doing in the future.
Colin, I could talk here for another 3 hours,
Yes.
quite comfortably. I feel we've just scratched the surface
Yes.
here, and I've said that 2 or 3 times in the last fortnight.
I'm
And
sure.
John Wilson last week, Joe Noble, all these guys, you know, I think we're going to have to develop something next year. We come back for Colin Maclellan Part 2.
The sequel. Well, Alan, let me say that what you're doing is a great thing and a great service to piping, and taking advantage of the technology we have today to get people on record, which will be here forever.
It's a pleasure really doing it, and it really is a pleasure. And as long as people regard it in the future as something that is worthwhile, that's something we're quite happy about that. But we'll look forward to the sequel. Thanks very much, Colin.
That'd be great, Alan. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Right.